So everybody who watched the first talk noticed that Bjorn had this part of the square moving around and changing colors. And that was written in JavaScript. If you don't know JavaScript, I would like to sorry, Ole. Hi, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that that we are having a second talk, and I would like to welcome the speaker for the second talk, and well, it's our very own Natalie. and yeah, you have started already?
Yes.
Okay.
This is not planned. We're just keeping you all awake. It's late. Thank you, Ole. So if you want to create that square and you know Go, but you don't necessarily know JavaScript, this is a great tool that you should be familiar with. And you can find it with this URL, but also if you Google for a JavaScript playground, OpenAI, you will find it. Also any other combination. So the first thing, this is how it looks. It has this part, it has this magical part we'll see in a second, and it has an input to which I already copied one line, and I'm going to click on this. We see magic happening, and we have a square. Make the square move around the screen. It's moving around the screen. Make it change colors every second. It started moving as 1 second. So demo is not going as planned. I would like to show you that this is what Tim and I did just now over the break. We did exactly the same input. So you can see here in gray the input that I gave, and this is the generated code. Then the second input was have the ball change colors every 1 second. The third one was add a button next to it to make it set the speed. So lo and behold, set speed. Now it's really fast. Now it's really slow. Now it's leaving a trace. Oh, now it's changing colors. Before that, as you can see, it was leaving a trace. Maybe the speed is a bit too fast. Let's see. There, and tick again. It's behaving interestingly. But we did see this work earlier. Anyway, if you play around with this thing enough, it will generate what you plan for it to generate, and then you can use this code only in the relevant block, or you can export this to something like JS Fiddle and then copy it into your editor, into Replit if you don't have an editor set up for JavaScript and whatnot. And this is how you can do JavaScript things with it. You can do also a lot more complicated things like include, get my camera feed, get my audio feed, get my screen sharing, add what's it called? Like when you add a transcription for a speech to text and so on, you can do all sorts of things. It will put this here. Try this enough times, it will generate the right thing. You can find all sorts of videos, including of demos that I've been playing with it, and created my own little demo tool for that. Then jumping into our talk. So this is a talk that I gave at GopherCon Israel last month. And it was the day that BART by Google AI was introduced. So this is another cool thing, but this is something that I'm slightly less associated with, so it's not a lot of focus. It also was, I don't know anyone who got access to that, so it kind of disappeared off my radar, but back in February it was really cool. GopherCon Europe is a conference that I'm organizing, and I have to do some UI things there as well, and I'm also not good with that, so I was chatting how, I was showing how we did all sorts of useful things with the different tools by OpenAI out there. For example, generating a new logo based on the GopherCon, based on the Go Gopher. So the year before we were using the real Go Gopher, and now we made this more cute one. Some other things we also did is move to Stripe, so trying to make the checkout look nicer. I wanted the button to hover when I go over it, and I don't know if you can see, but it changes colors. So ChatGPT helped me do those things. Sorry for all the buzzwords. It also helped me make the code of contact in the website look really visible. So it's actually just changing colors in rotation once you go there. So it's small, useful tools that I'm using it in my everyday life. Then there was a joke about, sorry, for mentioning things about front end because it's a Go conference. So now jumping into something interesting, this is a talk I gave 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago in GopherCon in the US about AI-driven development. And if I would do this again today, I would call it AI-based development. And this was kind of a recap of a little bit about AI and like the history, you know, going back to the 60s or so. And then some predictions to what will come, because 2021 in AI times is like half a century ago. So lots of things happened since then, but still I can recommend watching this if you want some recap on how things started in the context of AI and development. This will not be the focus of this talk, but this was kind of, if you need a background, watch that. Hi, my name is Natalie. I was wearing many hats. I was a Go developer here in Berlin for many years. I worked as an engineering manager, I worked as a developer advocate, and right now I'm very excited about AI. I became an ambassador of OpenAI in 2020. So the last 3 years, this is what I'm talking about a lot, but I'm also bringing in the Go niche. AI is obviously very much of a Python territory, and I'm trying to bring in the Go part of it. 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was speaking a lot about TensorFlow and AI and Go, and unfortunately, this was completely abandoned by the Go team. I got to complain about that in person and hear the response that, yes, it's abandoned, let go. What does it mean that it was abandoned? That for a while, you could use the TensorFlow API with Go, and it would work, but when there was a major version bump, Go was left behind, to the level that there is a pull request to bump this to the front. It was not merged, it will not be merged. It's really let go. This is me letting go, moving to OpenAI. Other things that I'm doing is a podcast that's called Go Time, so I'm one of the hosts, a meetup that's called Women Techmakers in Berlin. I am a Go GDE, which means I am, in the before times, it meant that I would fly to places on the budget of Google to speak in conferences, so conference would not have to pay for me as a speaker. And, you know, virtual, they don't have to pay for my Zoom seat. I'm organizing the GopherCon conference. There's a new conference that I'm organizing that's called Hey AI, which is about generative AI, which is really an exciting field for me, but I'm also still very much excited about Go. And security is the third thing that I'm excited about, so I'm also organizing a conference that's called B-Sides Berlin. You should join them. I used to work in all those companies that you see in the bottom, and another thing that I'm doing in my free time is teach a DevOps course at the university in Berlin that's called HTW or HTW. So most of the talks that here is about the connection between Go and AI things. Specifically, it's going to be about OpenAI things because this is my world of context, and this is as an ambassador, what I get to do is get access to things that are still under NDA with the purpose that once it becomes general availability, I'm giving office hours. That means that if you go to the documentation page of OpenAI, you see a link there of community ambassadors, one of the 6. 2 are based in European time zone. I'm one of the 2. So you can always find there a calendar link, and you can have a call with me and chat about this is what I try to do, this is what I want to do, help me use the API, or some, help me do a better prompt and things like that. The agenda is a little bit of vocabulary, setting kind of terms straight. This was also at times before there was an API for ChatGPT, so one of the distinctions you'll see here, which is not relevant anymore, is that that's not a thing. Some AI tools, and the part that I find really interesting is why I see Go to be a future compatible language in the context of AI, and what does that mean? But we start with the buzzwords, right? So GPT is a term that came out around the time that this article came out. I think it was 2015, if I'm not wrong. This was by lots of Googlers. So the concept of GPT, although some people associate it with OpenAI, Google started that. However, in 2016-17 came out this article by some researchers from OpenAI, and then they kind of kicked off the concept. No, the Transformers started, sorry, I said wrong. The Transformers started with this article by Google in 2015, and then 1-2 years later, GPT kicked in as the OpenAI thing that they developed, which is a type of a model that has engines which you can look at as instances, like the Da Vinci, like the ChatGPT, and so on. ChatGPT. Introduce yourself in one line. Well, it's a language model. And then there's DALL-E, which is also a model by OpenAI, and this is you put input, you get images. There are fun things that are happening in the space by OpenAI, but also by other companies, and I'm sure this will not stop here. Then there's the JavaScript Playground, which is a less known buzzword, but a useful tool, I think, especially if you have to do a little bit of UI and maybe testing and so on. So this is what we saw in the very beginning. This is an example of a demo that I had. So it has those parts that I mentioned, that it has a camera, it has the screen sharing, it has this speech to text, and it has a little bar, a logo, anything you want. Then there is Codex/Copilot. Maybe some of you are using it. So the difference between them is that Codex is the engine by OpenAI. Copilot is Microsoft using, or GitHub using that engine and fine-tuning it on their specific last mile, kind of, let's say, but also adding their own prompt, which is sort of their secret spice at the very end, giving the context. So this is how it's different when you, as a person who goes to the OpenAI website and then write in some prompts and some code, this is why it generates different outputs, because you don't know exactly what the context that they're giving, and you don't know what the prompts that they're using, and it's different, and this is sort of the new intellectual property of some companies, if you will. Next buzzwords is GPT-3, GPT-3.5, and the different engines. So when you go to the OpenAI Playground, which is where you build your prompt. So you get to practice with it sort of in this chat thing interface. You put input, you get output until this looks good. Then you click on view code, and then you put this with the API into your program. So GPT-3, as we said, this is the model. GPT 3.5 is also a model. It's a different model. It's not GPT-4. The instances that you see here, if there's a zoom in here, so the Da Vinci and so on, they are instances or engines of GPT-3. It is now public that ChatGPT is the instance or the engine for GPT 3.5. There are other engines for there. If you go to the website, you can read all the documentation around that and all the different names. Some more useful information about the different engines. So it's always the four: Da Vinci, Curie, Babbage, and Ada. The difference between them, it's ABCD, so it goes from top to bottom. The Ada is the fastest one, Da Vinci is the strongest and the most expensive one, and it goes in this up and down ladder. And they used to also have a bit more of a focus, like one is better for correcting things, like if you type a Google Maps address that is with a typo or two, then making correct context for geo stuff. Ada was very strong about that. By now they're all kind of the same, so it's really about optimization of speed and price. But a big difference that still remains is the difference between text and instruct. The top ones are text. The last one that you see, it's instruct. So text is the one that you write and it kind of completes in the spirit of what you wrote. Instruct is you give it instructions and it follows those instructions. So it's basically depending on how you interact with it. And a third big different engine is the ones that is related to code. It basically just has more fine-tuned data around code. So there's Codex, there's also Cushman. Then there's the company called OpenAI. Are they for profit? Are they non-profit? It's also a legit argument and conversation and so on. So it started as a non-profit. It became so now, right now, there's the labs of OpenAI that outputs all those cool things. They belong to a capped profit company, which means the investors who put money into OpenAI, once they get 30 times their investment, it's capped at 30x, which is a lot. Then it goes one level up to the non-profit. So it's both for-profit and non-profit. If you something that's important for you, this is the full picture. Nobody's wrong on the internet about this argument. OpenAI has an OpenAI fund. If you want to do a groundbreaking, let's say, AI-related startup, but it has to be really big, then you can go on this page and apply for that. They don't have any specific budget, any specific deadline, nothing specific. They just want to support revolutionary AI things, and that's intentionally like very vague. So any cool ideas? OpenAI fund. Somebody's in the waiting room. Must I admit them or can somebody help me? Thank you. Did you admit them? And then the last thing in the buzzwords list is Bard. At the time, it was a new cool thing by Google, and I think, yeah, I have not heard much of usage about it since then, so I cannot say much myself. And moving to the second part, AI tools. So what can AI do for developers? It can explain code. You give it a piece of code, you say, explain what does it do to me. And you can say, explain what it does like that. It can say, here's a piece of Python code, explain this to me in Go. Like if you're very good in your pattern recognition because you've been writing Go code for so long and you just see it in Go and like immediately understand it, you can also ask them to do that. Generate, right? Generate something that does a button that moves around, or generate a, we were saying authenticator or something that you recently did. So you can generate all sorts of blobs. It's not generating full programs at this point too well. Document. Here's a piece of code. Help me document this function. You can write it like as a 1-2 lines that you do above your function, or a page of documentation into your company's wiki. Refactor. This code is not efficient because 1, 2, 3. This code uses these old variable names. Use the new ones. These are some examples of refactoring that it can do for you. It's worth mentioning sometimes, obviously, it gives you wrong answer. A good thing to do at this point is to say, if you know the mistake, if you spotted the mistake, say, but this and that, and then kind of confront with that, and it will give you a better answer. If you're not sure and you want to have a sanity check always, you can always just ask, what is this code doing? Is it the same as I asked? Test. Here's a piece of code. Write for me 3 tests that check functionality A, B, and C. Make the test pass, make the test fail. Right? It's important for you break your tests before you commit them. Tedious works, which is sometimes associated with things that's somewhat related to generics, but basically copy-paste but change a little bit. This is also something that it can do for you, probably better because it will not make small tiredness, boredness mistakes. Offer alternatives. Here's a piece of code that you just generated for me. What else do you offer? This is actually what a Copilot is doing, right? When you can do next, next, next. This is sort of that. And now a little bit of diving into what tools specifically. So we said ChatGPT can concretely help us, Codex can concretely help us, and we can use some of the plugins in different IDEs. There is a public API for ChatGPT. The best way of using it is having an ongoing conversation, not just one atomic interaction. So I gave some examples of what would be those ongoing conversations, but basically it keeps context for a long time. The more correct or useful or rich the context is, the better your answer will be. It's good with instructions, it's good with completions. So if you start at the beginning of a function, it will complete this well as do this 1, 2, 3 as instruct, and it will do that well as well. Some concrete examples. This is a slide I recommend that you take a picture. So if you're kind of not feeling that you are very using this in the best way that's useful for you, this is some concrete examples that I find that are useful. I've also been mentioning them in the office hours. So this is something that kind of repeats. So explain, write this program that does this specific thing, changes this action to another action, rewrite languages, explain in another language, patch the 3 outputs, right? It gave you output A, it gave you output B, functionality C. Now make it speak together. So maybe like make the parameter names be the same and things like that. And more context gives a better reply. Then there was this thing that was going around the internet. Can you fail and make it say wrong things? Yes. He's not the only one. Is this a good use of everybody's time and credits and search and engines and footprint we live in the world? Probably not. Codex is a second tool. This is the one that is also Copilot is based on, but Codex is available in the playground, same as now this is an API. So these are the 2 concrete engines that right now are available. They started as ChatGPT, as a GPT-3, and they were trained on, fine-tuned on the code specifically. And yes, it has an API, and it continues code very well based on few lines. If you give the beginning of a function, or maybe the name, even like an import, and you write the documentation, what does your library do, and write the first line, import FMT or something like this. It continues it well. It will not do as well with instructions. Like if you say something like, write code for me, not necessarily, but here too, more context is better and it can get creative. Here's a comparison of me giving as an input, rewrite this code from Go to Ruby, and I did not provide any code. ChatGPT said, I don't know what you want. And Codex was like, okay, let's try. And it rewrote something. So this is kind of a bit of a comparison. When should you use which? Now, the 3 plugins that I know of, Copilot, Ghostwriter, and Tab9. Cost roughly the same. Copilot is using Codex. It's available in VS Code. We all know that. We'll probably try the free version at the very least. Then there's a Ghostwriter from Replit, and Replit is a web browser IDE. Basically, any language that you want to use and you don't feel like installing and dependencies and whatnot, go to Replit and you can put your code there and run it. And they have their own autocomplete tool that helps you write code, so it relies on these engines and models. And when in the past they were openly saying that they use that they were using GPT-3, but now and currently they announced that they just use OpenAI. So in the wide meaning, whatever that means. And there is another one that's called Tab9, and they're using their own internal models. As you see from the screenshots, it all looks kind of the same, so not much of a jump between different behaviors, kind of, and also from the cost, it's kind of the same. Another useful tool is the ambassadors page, where you can book the hours with myself and the other ambassadors. There are 6 of us. Each one has a bit of another focus. There's somebody who's really good in education, somebody who has launched several companies, somebody who is very creative, and so on. Another useful tool or interesting tool that I found on Twitter, this is called Backend GPT. This is basically you send to it prompts like, we are building a to-do app and add these 3 to-dos, and then it generates everything behind the scene, and then you're making an API call, which is what are the, strike out this to-do, what are the remaining to-dos. So kind of it uses that, it even takes out of the image the database itself. Is it good, is it bad? It's too soon to know. It's a very new project. It's 1-2 months old, but it's at the very least super interesting. LangChain. Anybody knows here in the crowd LangChain? LangChain is unfortunately written in Python. I'm spending my days these days to trying to rewrite small parts of it into Go. It's a huge project, many contributors, so it's not even close to a race or anything, but it's a wonderful tool. You can, once you use that, once you downloaded it and or cloned it and kicked off the initial thing, you can basically write with a few lines, import this model, that model, that model, make them speak. So it saves you, it's sort of like a wrapper for the different models, but it's also not just models, it's also calls to different APIs. So it kind of helps you write a very large and complex tool that does whatever you want it to do. So you kind of build your own puzzle with many simple wrappers. So it simplifies everything for you. But yes, it's in Python. Another term that's worth knowing is ML DevOps, right? MLOps. So deploying all those things is different from deploying large systems, regular large systems. It has some more challenges around the data, around the model, and so on, but also just around the volume of this thing. It's wild. Google is very big, right? They work really hard. We all admire their SRE book. ChatGPT was something like 5 times more or 10 times more. I forget already the numbers, but what they published in the first 2 months of their usage was like incomparable to the usage of Google itself. So this is different challenges from what, but also of the same thing. It's just a whole new scale. It's exciting, it's fun, it's DevOps. DevOps is also related to Go, obviously. A lot of the Go, the DevOps tooling out there in the world and the SRE tooling is written in Go. So I expect more of the same or more of the new interesting thing to show up. Still very fresh. Why Go? So now this is the fun part of why I think Go is a great choice for what I see how AI is going to automate some of the things. Some conversations that sometimes I find myself in is, will AI replace juniors and then make the whole tech industry not feasible because we all need juniors to eventually become seniors and mid-level people? I think it will not replace juniors. I think that a better comparison would be to abstractions, right? When you think of a senior Python person, you don't think of somebody who's really good with punch cards. They have no idea about punch cards. They never learned that. Maybe it's something they saw once, but you don't know that, and it's not a skill that's needed. So some level of programming will no longer be needed. This is why I see that it's not threatening on juniors. It will redefine what a junior is, what skills are needed, but juniors will always be there, and we'll always need them. Why is Go AI compliant, future compliant, and how you want to call it? So just before I start saying why, what I mean with AI compliant is that I think more code will be generated with AI, and we will still be interacting with it, but differently. Because of these abstractions and because of, for example, most of us are using some plugins, some Copilot or something, and we're already AIing a little bit our flow. It will be more, and I think some languages will not survive that. It's well formatted thanks to GoFumt. So functions always look like this. It's never, where do the square or the curly brackets go? And the good thing is that it creates more consistent training data, right? If you go to many languages where it's not the same, you'll have half of the data like that, half of the data like that, and maybe another part somehow differently. So the quality of the training data, we're starting at a better start point. It's also consistent. Functions, all testings will always look in this structure. Uppercase, lowercase logic will always be the same. So it's better training data, but also it understands our templating that we created the language around. Tabs, not spaces. It's been a discussion for a long time, but so a big problem is tokens and prompts. Prompts are limited. Right now, the biggest prompt that you can write on the biggest engine is something like 4,000 prompts, 4,000 tokens, which do not map one-to-one. But this is something like, depending on the language and on many different things, 10, 20,000 characters. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's not much. You cannot write a whole a whole repository. You cannot even write sometimes a whole library there. So you start optimizing. And these simple things are already helping us that we have to do slightly less work. It's already more efficient, no new spaces, no new lines. The linter will always kill those things. It's a youngish data with not a lot of new old code, which means that it's not going to hallucinate importing tools that no longer exist or no longer in use, and it will also not be taught on old practices of security that no longer are a thing. No deprecated Go versions. It will not try to create code that is not supported and is not okay. And it's less library oriented, which means whenever it will start imagining code, it will actually write code and not like half a code of imports that don't exist or maybe private or whatever, but just a lot of code. So those are the many benefits that I see of Go being more future-proof with AI stepping into our lives as developers. And that is that. We talked about the terminology. What is the difference between Copilot and Codex? We talked about what can you do with AI as tools. And there's not many tools right now out there. Obviously, it's in development. Obviously, there will be. But you will be able to do the same things like explain, generate, document, and so on. And why I think Go is a future-compatible language in the context of AI. Thank you.